Hello there, dear viewer, and welcome to attaQ. My name is Jakob. I'm your host, and you're watching a attaQ episode. In this video, I will be going over my Drambo haQ. It's a groove box that I built inside Drambo, obviously. And to be quite frank, I am not happy with my groove box, and I am not criticizing Drambo. I'm criticizing my work. Yeah. Now, I want to show you some practices that aren't necessarily bad practices, but it can be if you are, like me, limited on hardware resources and if you're using an older iPad model. And just as a reference, I'm using an iPad Pro 12.9 inch from 2015. Right, so how is this thing generating sounds? Well, I've got 8 channels set up here, and I'll highlight the synthesizer channels in red, and I'll highlight the sample player channels in green. So I want to begin with the sample playing instruments or sample playing tracks. And there are basically 2 different types of sample players inside my Groovebox project here. I'm using one type for the drums and for the vocal channel, and I'm using another one for the lady track over here. Okay, so the vocal track and the drum track instruments, well, they're basically copies of one another. There's a few differences between them, but I think we're gonna have a look at the drum one because the vocal one is just set up almost the same way. Now, if we go all the way to the bass drum side of this instrument, we can see a lot of knobs. But if we scroll ahead forward, we can see that there's less and less knobs, and now what we see are panning knobs, amp knobs, and VU meters. What's going on here is that there are actually more modules loaded behind the scenes, but I've hidden some of them and I've kept some of them in view. And another thing you can see is how I sectioned this off with spacers. And this is because I want to be able to find the different sections easily because I get easily confused when there's a lot of stuff on the screen. So we got a kick section, snare section, moves on to the hi-hat section and percussion. It's just a great way of sectioning up your instruments. I think that most of you could agree that many of the things I've already shown you aren't really bad practices. And they aren't. Marking stuff up, naming them, hiding stuff that don't necessarily need to be on screen. These are good practices. Let's just keep going. So let's break open this instrument box here so we can see all of the modules. Well, the way I've set this up is that each sample is loaded into its own sample playing module. And that is part of what makes this thing so heavy. You do not need to build it like this. And there are even more stuff in here that some are probably gonna wonder about. Because if you look here, you can see that I've also got amp modules, and you really don't need that since the sample player modules already have amp knobs. So why in the world would I load in an amp module? Well, it's quite frankly because it has a meter, and I like that. I like being able to have a visual overlook over the outputs of my sounds. And that's the only reason to why I've loaded this amp module, just so that I can see what the output looks like from each sound or each sample playing module. Now, if I wanted to save some resources, I could just sacrifice the meter view and remove all of the amp modules. In all honesty, we wouldn't gain too much from sacrificing the VU meters, but we really should to optimize this Groovebox, and I'm going to do that in the future. There is another thing that we could do that would save us a lot of hardware resources, and that is rebuild this sample player into something that runs more economically. I think you know what I mean. So right now our situation is this: one sample player. So 16 samples, 16 sample players. That's a lot of modules, right? We could make that into a smaller number. We could actually just use one sample player. And I'll show you that in a bit. But I also want to show you what we'd lose, and that is the multi-output. Why is it good to have multi-outputs? Well, because even though I'm sacrificing a lot of hardware resources when building my sample playing instrument like this, well, I'm also gaining a lot of sound control. Sound control, is that even a word? Well, I can easily sculpt each of the outputs any way I want. If I want a reverb on just one of the sounds, I can easily input that into this chain where I want it, and it's not going to affect everything else. And I can also filter each of the sounds any way I want, and I've done that with one of the bass drums. This is the reason to why I'm building it so heavy. Alright, so now we're gonna move on from the heavyweight type of sample player that we can build inside Drambo to the lightweight type of sample player that you should build if you're using an older iPad running on limited resources. Now the channel we need to look at is the one with the kissing emojis with the mouth emojis. And you know, kiss in Sweden, when you say it like this, kiss, it actually means pee. If we take a look at the lady sample player track here and at this module, we can see that it's way smaller than the other two drum sampling and vocal sampling instruments. And if we break open the instrument box here, we can see all of the modules. And right here, there's just one sample playing module. Now, when it comes to the lightweight sample player, you have to think about how you want to set up your key zones, how you're triggering your samples. Now, with the heavy sample player, it's done like this. So if we open up the edit menu for bass drum 1, then we can see that I've got one green area with one sample loaded. It's set up to be played from C3 to C3, so that's just one note. And I've done this for every other sample player module. So the next one will trigger from D3 to D3 and so on. Now, when it comes to key zones regarding the light sample player, well, there are two ways of doing it. So if we press the edit menu on this sampler module, we can see that I've got a large green area and I've got a long sample in here with markers inside of it. And each marker is a trigger point, and each trigger point is then triggered by one key on the keyboard. And you do it like this when you want to slice a sample. But what if you wanted to build something with shorter sounds, like one-shots, drum sounds for instance? Well, in that case, you wouldn't do it like this. You would do it like this. So you would select one key, add a zone to it, and then load a drum sample onto that zone. When you're done, you're setting up the next zone and you load the next sample. So bass drum, snare drum, and then maybe a hi-hat. And that way you can set up a sample player for single shots, drum machines, whatever you want to make. When you're building it like this, you are saving a lot of resources instead of loading multiple sample playing modules like I did with the other two tracks. So for those of you who are using older iPads, if you want to save on resources, now you know how to do that. Okay, so it's time to go into synthesizer territory, but there is a problem here because I've got 5 of them and I cannot possibly go into each and every one of them thoroughly. That would just turn this video into a long tutorial, which I don't want to make. What I want to do is to point out something that I'm doing that I just consider being bad practice and not something you should really copy. And it has to do with the sidechain compression and the way that I'm using compressors in here. And I also want to talk about why I'm using 2 bass synthesizers instead of just 1. So let's talk about that first. Why am I using 2 bass synthesizers? Well, the thing is that I'm doing it like this because I want to be able to switch out my sounds instantly in the middle of a live performance without having any issues. And now I have to explain myself, so bear with me here. Think about this. When you're using a third-party finished product, an instrument, a drum machine, a synthesizer, you basically have this finished thing with a set of controls, and when you're saving sound presets, you're saving settings for those controls in that preset. And then it's an easy thing of loading it. Well, you can't do that in Drambo because Drambo is a modular synthesizer. You can build any type of instrument that you want. Now you can save your entire session with all your recorded notes, your sequences, your instruments, your routings, and if you want, you can also save your instruments. But you can't save sound presets. And so if you want to load a new sound for one of your instruments, you're going to have to load an entire instrument instead. And when you've built everything as overly heavy as I have, well, you might end up having issues. And I've had that. I've had audio pausing and I've had glitches. So right from the get-go, I decided I needed to have 2 bass synthesizers in there because I wanted to be able to play that in a certain way. And now I can have one bass sound in one segment of my track, and I can also have another bass sound in another segment of my track. And that's the way I'm doing it in my live performance, basically. So what is the bad practice here? Well, quite frankly, it's me not looking into this any deeper. You see, I haven't looked into if there's any way of actually building some kind of a parameter recaller or, some kind of a preset switching thing which does not involve loading an entire instrument. I haven't looked. I haven't done any research. I simply just gave up, duplicated my bass, and went on building, practically painting myself into a corner. And that is bad practice, people. Don't do it like that. Okay, so the last thing I want to go through is the sidechain compression and why you might not want to build it the way that I did. There are several ways of setting up sidechain compression, and the way that I've done it is by, basically putting up a single compressor on every instrument and then running a signal from the drum channel into those compressors. So now I've got a load of compressors and I've also got a load of controls, and that's the benefit from doing this. If you don't want to compress the pad channel as heavily as you're doing with the bass channel, you can easily set that up now. You can just decrease the threshold or change the attack time, stuff like that. The downside to this is, well, it's using up resources, of course. If you end up like me, basically setting up all the compressors the same way, which I realized after a while, well, it's so unnecessary to do like I did. So what's the second way of doing this? Well, you could just set every instrument up to being sent through a bus and then put one single compressor on there and then run the drum channel to that one. So now you're only working with one sidechain compression unit and you're saving resources and you're still able to do sidechain compression. I'm so stupid. Always check over your builds and question whether you're doing the right thing or not. I'm getting tired of listening to myself complaining, and I want to be able to streamline my Groovebox to a point where I feel proud over my work, and I'm far from it. This is exactly why I don't want to share this template. There's one last thing I want to say about this, and that is that Drambo is without a doubt, for me at least, one of the most fun apps that have come out during 2020. It's a gift to the iOS music community. And if you're not getting it, you're missing out on something amazing. And with that, I want to thank you so much for watching. Before you leave, if you like this video, then hit me with a thumbs up down there. Leave a comment, tell me about your projects. And that's pretty much it. If you want to help out this channel, apart from just doing the thumbs up, you can always, you already know what to do, right? Links and everything. God, I'm so tired of listening to myself complaining about this. And I've had to do that a lot now because I'm replaying it so I can edit the audio and then the video, and I'm getting sick of it. As usual, I wish you a very productive week. Now go finger all of your stuff and have a lot of fun doing it.